Right, good morning and welcome to the June board meeting of the CQC. We had, of course, hoped to be meeting in person, but because of the extension of the restrictions, we are meeting yet again via Teams. Rebecca Lloyd-Jones is not with us today, but we are very pleased to welcome Blessing Chukwu, who is the Gender Equality Network co-chair. You are extremely welcome here today. Does anybody have any declaration of interest they wish to make? Very good. I think that takes us straight then to the minutes of our meeting of the 19th of May. Are they a true and accurate record of all we discussed?
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. There's nothing outstanding on our action log. Is there anything arising that's not otherwise on the agenda anybody wanted to raise? Good, fine. Well, then we move swiftly onto our report from the executive team. Ian.
Thanks, Peter, and good morning, everybody. A few items to report this month. I think the first thing to report is the successful launch of our strategy. You'll recall that we launched our new strategy at the end of May. It was a strategy which had widespread consultation, and I was really pleased about the way that it continues to be widely welcomed and seen as an innovative and ambitious new strategy. We just need to go away and deliver it now, which of course is what we are embarked upon. Just picking up on your point at the top of the meeting, Peter, around the Prime Minister's announcement recently that stage 4 of the COVID roadmap has been postponed. I just wanted just to remind everybody that we will continue to regulate. We've regulated since the beginning of the pandemic, and we will continue to regulate despite the postponement of stage 4. We'll continue to do that in the way that we have been, with a big focus on higher risk services across all of the directorates that we operate on. And again, we're not as with many employers, we're not formally returning to offices until government guidance allows, and that of course does create some practical difficulties for us, but of course we've been working with those for the last 15 or 16 months anyway. In terms of work we've been doing with parliamentarians, Peter and I attended the all-party parliamentary group on whistleblowing to support them in their work looking at whistleblowing within health and social care. I'm also really pleased to announce that Professor Ursula Gallagher, one of our recently retired Deputy Chief Inspectors from the Primary Medical Services group, was awarded an MBE in the Queen's Birthday Honours List recently, and that MBE was awarded for services to healthcare and patient safety. Many of you will know Ursula well. She made numerous appearances at this board, presenting on a range of topics, and I think it would be fair to say that Ursula's leadership and passion, frankly, for patient safety in areas like clinical nursing practice, the operation of the Primary Medical Services Directorate, outcomes for children and detained people, really did raise the bar in terms of the work that we do and excellence in healthcare. And I think a number of people will have gained very directly from working alongside Ursula as mentors, but also people who use healthcare will have gained from the work that Ursula did. So I think we're all really pleased that Ursula has been honoured in this way. In terms of upcoming events, we have been invited to speak to the all-party parliamentary group on learning disability. So I've been invited alongside Debbie Ivanova, one of our Deputy Chief Inspectors who leads on learning disabilities and autism for us. We'll be going later this month as they reflect as a group of parliamentarians on the fact that it's been 10 years since Winterbourne View. And other panelists will include the Minister of State for Care, representatives from NHS England, and of course relatives of people who are receiving care. Peter, that's all I wanted to say before handing on to Kate, but I'm obviously happy to take any questions.
No, I think we just go straight on to Kate. Thank you.
Good morning all. So what I'm going to update you on follows on nicely from Ian's comments about the up and coming appearance at the all-party parliamentary group. So I want to update you on our work around closed cultures and our transformation of how we inspect services for people with learning disabilities and autistic people. So first of all, on the closed cultures front, our board will be aware that we have been busily developing improved tools to enable us to get under the skin of a service and to really understand what it feels like as best as we can for someone to be in receipt of that care. So that work has happened. We've developed a new tool called our Quality of Life tool that is now being piloted on hospital inspections, and it's delivering some good results that will in time be evaluated. We are also planning on using this tool as we embark on our series of adult social care inspections of services for people with learning disabilities and autistic people in the community as well. So good progress on the development and training of that tool in closed cultures. And then just moving on to learning disability and autism. So as Ian mentioned, Debbie Ivanova is our lead chief inspector on this agenda for the next 12 months. And she's focusing on 3 areas of work. She's focusing on how we can ensure that we consistently only register services that deliver the model of best practice, that we make sure that we support services to improve, but where services aren't able to improve and people are getting poor quality care, that we take robust action. And her third area of work is looking at how people access health and social care in a timely way and look at their kind of pathway through health and care. So Debbie has been doing responsive risk-based inspections, going out into inpatient hospitals where we had information of concern, or possibly it was a service rated previously as poor. We've been using our new tool, and in each of those risk-based inspections that we've done, we have been taking some form of enforcement activity. So that is telling me that we are going out to the right sorts of services, and we are using all the tools at our disposal to make sure that we are taking action to ensure that people are getting improved outcomes. So that was the update I wanted to give on learning disability and closed cultures. And I think I'm handing now to Ted.
Ted.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone. Over the last month, we have started in hospitals using a more streamlined and more flexible approach to inspection to revisit some of the organisations, the providers we've had long-term concerns about, such as those in special measures or those who are under a special observation. One of the, I think, really encouraging things we've found is that we are finding that has been improvement in some of those services, despite the fact they've just come through a pandemic. And I think I want to start off just by paying tribute to the way that services have been led during this pandemic. There's a lot of very good work going on. And as I say, it's not just dealing with the pandemic, but some underlying issues have been addressed. And I think that's really encouraging going forward. And I look forward to publishing reports on those services later in the year when we're ready to do so. But having said that, there are still significant problems in the system in the aftermath of the pandemic, which I reported on this board last month. And I have to say, since then, the situation has just on urgent emergency care have been really very severe, and they continue to be severe. And that is at a time of the year when you expect, in a normal year, for them to be lessened. So the summer has really feeling for many services very much like the winter pressures. And equally, the waiting list for people for planned care has continued to increase, despite the fact, and I've seen this myself on visits to hospitals, the staff are very focused on tackling the backlog in planned care. But there is, because of the pandemic, a lot of unmet need that needs to be addressed. And I think I would summarise this as there are enormous pressures on the system at the moment, and we know, working with staff, that they're doing a lot to address those pressures. For instance, we had a workshop with frontline clinicians from emergency departments all over the country last week, when we had an opportunity to share good practice with those people who've been addressing some of these issues. So how can they, under these exceptional services, maintain safe care? We had really very interesting interaction and supporting services going forward. But the underlying issue about the structural problems in urgent emergency care, which we were talking about long before the pandemic, have only been exacerbated and brought to the fore by the pandemic. And equally, the waiting list for elective care, which again we were talking about as a concern before the pandemic has made very much more clearer as an issue. And I think while the services need to respond to the immediate problem, we also need, and the services need, to look forward to actually changing the way they provide care so they can better meet the needs of the population. I think the changes in terms of the integrated care systems next year is an opportunity to really address some of the models of care that need to meet the needs of the populations they serve. Can I just mention maternity services? We are continuing our programme of responsive risk-based reviews of maternity services. Now, these reviews we're doing at the moment are very much based on culture and leadership, and we're looking at very much aligned with our strategy going forward. And I think we are continuing to find some issues in some services where culture and leadership is not driving the safety in the way we want. And we've been reporting on those as we've done the individual reports. We'll produce a summary report later in the year. Having said that, we are finding some good progress in some maternity services, and I'm very glad to say that the investment is going in from NHS England to increase the staffing in maternity services, because one of the ongoing issues we see day in, day out are shortages of staff in midwifery and obstetrics. So a lot of work is going on in terms of that nationally, and we're working with stakeholders to drive that forward. And we'll input into that when we produce our report on maternity services later in the year. That's all I wanted to say at this stage, Peter. I'll take any questions. If not, I'll hand over to Rosie.
So it's not a question, Ted, but it's just a sort of comment to reinforce what you were saying at the start of your report. The pandemic may be beating, but it hasn't ended and probably isn't going to end for quite a considerable time. People are now very worried about flu next winter. The backlog you've referred to is considerable, and I suspect that many people on that backlog will be sicker and require greater care than they would have done if they presented earlier. So your point about services having to think very differently, it's just so important, isn't it? Because the pressures are just greater and will get greater still, I suspect.
I think that's right, and there's a real determination in services. But for instance, elective care, the Royal College of Surgeons called for separate standalone elective centres to be developed, and certainly we've seen that those hospitals that have got a separate site which is purely elective have managed the pandemic pressures around planned care better than those that try and do it all on one site. And I think we do need to look seriously at the way we provide care, both in relation to the emergency care and elective care, to meet the pressures that were there anyway, but which been made more severe by the pandemic. And the point you make about next winter is very valid. I think there's a lot of concern about resurgence of other respiratory viruses, flu, RSV, during the next winter. They may come earlier, they may be greater in number. I mean, we can't be certain, but there is a real concern about that. And of course, that will set things back again, apply more pressure on urgent emergency care, and also cause further problems with elective care. So this is a problem that is not going away, and we need really significant thinking about how we provide care to actually meet the needs of the population going forward.
Thanks. And Rosie, obviously, primary care is going to be under huge pressure as well.
Yes, we're seeing enormous pressure in primary care and certainly in general practice at the moment. And GP colleagues are telling me that the demand going into services is unlike anything they've seen before in some cases. And so I share Ted's concerns about the coming months, because I think that's at a time where people are already feeling exhausted and tired after all we've had to manage over the last few months. But having said that, as Ted said, we are seeing significant improvement in some services, which is great, despite all of those pressures. And what the first aspect of my report is that we've been looking at our special measures practices, and we've undertaken a programme of re-inspection of special measures practices over the last few months. And it's fantastic to see many of those practices have actually come out of out of special measures. And one of the pieces of work we're doing at the moment is looking at actually the correlation between the length of time between re-inspection of those practices and the improvements that have been made because of the pandemic and various other reasons. In some cases during COVID, we had to leave those re-inspections slightly longer than we would have previously with the 6-month re-inspection, and we found significantly more improvements if people had a bit more time. So we want to feed this into our learning, into our future approach, and develop a much more flexible approach to allow for those improvements to be made. But I just would like to say thank you to all of those practices who have spent the time improving their services for people despite all of the challenges that they have had to encounter. We are continuing with our risk-based approach, and we are, with all of our inspections, featuring an aspect of a look at access, and we will be looking at pulling together all of the learning from the access work into an insight report and then into the state of care report later on in the year. The other two areas, just to briefly mention, is we're working very closely with Health Education England and NHS England around the additional roles reimbursement scheme. As the board is aware, there is primary care networks are looking to recruit an additional 26,000 people into primary care from a whole range of backgrounds. And actually, I really welcome this. I think that we need a really strong, diverse workforce in primary care. I think the different skill mix that this will experience and really add to outcomes for people. I think, however, we're very keen that we make sure that people coming into primary care networks from a whole range of different backgrounds have the support, the supervision, the training that they need to be able to deliver their job, that governance is thought through, that there is clear accountability, especially if someone is working, for example, a pharmacist working between many different practices, to make sure that patient care is safe and that there is no concern from that point of view. So we're working very closely with stakeholders to look at how do we make sure that that happens. And the final thing just to mention in the report is an update on provider collaboration reviews, and we're currently undertaking the mental health provider collaboration review, which is, as we've previously said, has a focus on children and young people, and we are looking to bring back the learning disability and cancer reviews in the next board. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Rosie. Rosie, going back to your first point about practices in special measures, extended period for some between inspections, but presumably there is ongoing monitoring during that period.
There is ongoing monitoring and ongoing dialogue with the practice and ongoing working with local stakeholders such as the clinical commissioning groups and others to make sure that the practice is getting the support it needs to be able to improve and that the situation isn't deteriorating and not causing any increased harm in any way.
Thank you. Right, we're happy to move on to Kirsty. Kirsty, you may be on mute.
I'll win the prize for that one today. So yes, thank you. Just a couple of things from me today. I'm just going to update you on the people plan and then hand over to Chris, who's going to pick up the performance report. So just on the people plan, I think we're continue to make some good progress around that. Just a couple of areas to highlight. Last year we ran our all-staff conference virtually, and it was a real opportunity to get everybody in the organisation together for a conference. We are planning on doing the same again. The feedback has been incredibly positive from all our doing that again using the same form, and we'll be running at the end. This will give us some further opportunities for some bite-sized learning around some key areas for us, and also to have some good conversations around our strategy and our transformation programme. I'm also really pleased to say that for the first we participated in the Mind Workforce Wellbeing Index this year for the first time, and we were awarded a Silver Award, which I think is a really, really good achievement, given it was our first go at this. We were 43rd out of 140 organisations that participated, and it's given us a really solid benchmark now from which to move forward. So I think well done to the team who've been involved in that. And actually our next Pulse survey is going to be focused around wellbeing as well, just to add further into that one. There's a few other bits in the report, but I'm not going to pick up on those, and I'll just hand over to Chris now to talk about performance.
So before we just move to Chris, can I just bring Mark Saxton in, please?
Certainly.
Thanks, Chairman. And Kirsty, thanks a lot. Really good people report, really encouraging around inclusion, leadership, the Mind Wellbeing Award, and development and line management capability. But could I ask you a question, please, about people? It's kind of linked to the Green Plan, which I know is later in the agenda. It's, you know, about office working. And I know we've articulated an office working strategy at the moment based on business and personal well-being needs. But to what extent are we developing a new way of using offices based on our learnings from the pandemic? I just wonder if you could give us any information on that, please.
Yeah, certainly, Mark. So we now have 80% of our workforce that have elected to be permanently home-based. It was 60% before the pandemic, and we've given people the option to choose whether they want to be home-based or have flexible working going forwards, and so we've now got 80%. What we've done to support that is we've set out some guidance on how we want to work going forwards in terms of when people will be coming into offices. What we've said is we don't, if people have got quiet work to do or meetings are best conducted over Teams, then they should be working from home. They should, and if they do come in, it's more for set piece meetings like the board or our executive team meetings or other meetings. And I think it's really important that we as a leadership group set an example and don't just keep saying to people, oh, come in, and then we sort of gradually move back, because we want to make sure that we are using those offices in the right way, and we're also compliant with all the policies around home working and taxable benefits around that. So what we've done is we set that out as the policy. We are reviewing our estate strategy. We're quite clear that we want to keep the two key offices in Stratford in London and in Newcastle, and then some satellite offices that we've currently got, and we'll be monitoring the usage of those over the next few years to see how our estates plan is working. The key thing we want to do is put some metrics in around how we use our estate, so we can continue to keep a view of whether the estate is the right size and structure for us, and we'll be reporting back on that at ET on a sort of quarterly basis to see, once we get back out of the pandemic, how people are actually using that estate, and we'll keep it under review. And if it does look like we've got large amounts of capacity, then we will adjust accordingly, or vice versa. So it's I think we've got a good plan, and now we'll just sort of see how it pans out once we get back into some sort of more regular travelling and use of the estate.
Well, it seems to me, Kirsty, the whole world is on a learning curve as how you make a new model of working. So I would imagine that we will learn from the general experiences from our own and adjust over the next year or two.
Yeah, I would also say that, Chair. I think it's this blending that we'll learn from others, but also hear from our people as to what works for them. But thanks, Kirsty, that's encouraging to hear. Thank you.
Right, good. So Chris, over to you.
Yeah, so it is April's performance, so obviously quite early in the year, so just a few headlines for me. So in terms of registration applications, simple applications have taken 28.4 days to process. Complex applications 134.6. There's quite a close focus on this internally at present, just to ensure we're seeing improvement in average over the course of this year. This is already showing the volume of application in the system has come down at a fast pace, so we'll continue to monitor that report to board. In terms of safeguarding, performance for safeguarding alerts is 93% and for concerns is 97% against a target of 95%. On whistleblowing, in April we introduced a new measure to capture how we mitigate risks and whistleblowing inquiries with the aim that we record action within 5 days. In April, we recorded initial mitigation within 5 days in 72% of cases, it's a target of 95%. This has been discussed with each director who are reviewing that position. In terms of regulatory action, something we continue to track in April 2020 right up to the 10th of June this month. 52% of locations have had regulatory activity, be it an inspection or a call to the provider. And in regards to enforcement, 4% of urgent enforcement was served within 3 days. In terms of HR, a couple of metrics there. So turnover is remained stable at just under 8%, with sickness currently at 3.19%. And with regards to our money, at the end of April, revenue budget was underspent by 1.1 million. This cross-pay and non-pay reflects a combination of ongoing reduced travel and the time and delivery of activity. At this stage, we're assuming we will be on budget for the year, but forecast plan being established. And on a capital at the end of April, we were £500,000 underspent. That is actually due to time of activity with the expectation that we'll be on budget for the year and that'll be fully utilised.
Chris, I appreciate you're the scorekeeper in one regard, not a batsman, but I'm a bit concerned about the safeguarding and whistleblowing performance where we have missed targets. Can you or Chief Inspector colleagues give us some reassurance on this?
Shall I get started? Is that all right, Chris? So just to put this into context, the numbers of safeguarding referrals that came in April were small. So we're talking about less than 60, and it's a handful when the KPI was missed. And each one of those cases, we followed up and we've been assured that appropriate action has been taken. So the right thing has happened in each of those cases. What we're now doing is, in that very small number of cases, unpicking why we weren't able to hit the KPI. So with regard to safeguarding, the numbers are small and action has been taken. Chris talked about our new way of capturing our whistleblowing. So previously, inspectors were in the routine of recording an action at the end of an outcome, at the end of an investigation. That meant that for us, it was sometimes hard to have of how whistleblowings were being dealt with in that kind of interval. So we said, actually, we want to have much better visibility of how risk is being mitigated at the point we find out about the whistleblowing. So we've introduced this new way where we now require what they've done to mitigate that risk. And Peter, I think it's something where we just need to do a bit of reinforcing the message to the organisation so that we can get inspectors capturing what they need to in light of our new requirement, really to focus more on outcomes and to give us that better visibility. And then the final thing is there's a delivery coordination group that Ted Rosie and my Deputy Chief Inspector sit on, along with many other reps from other parts of the organisation, and that group, along with the safeguarding committee, are kind of crawling all over these figures on a kind of weekly basis as well. I don't know, Ted or Rosie, if I captured our collective position, I don't know whether you want to come in.
Yes, I certainly support that, and the Delivery Coordination Committee and the Safeguarding Committee are monitoring this very carefully. I think this new KPI on whistleblowing, to some extent, is trying to push our performance up. So it's the very first month of trying it. I think we need people.
Oh, Sally.
Advisory group that is a group that is an important forum for us. It brings together representatives from people who use services, providers, and wider stakeholders to help shape some of our collective thinking on elements of our strategic development. We brought 3 issues to the group. I just want to report back on some of the conversations that we were having. The first was our update on the development of our approach to integrated care systems. The points that the group collectively raised here, and the representatives say comes right across from health into care and into primary care. The importance of ensuring that ICSs themselves and that our oversight of them doesn't just focus on health provision and NHS outcomes, but the wider health and care, and the importance of linking social care needs to be an integral part of our assessment of an ICS. And there was a support for CQC's focus on equalities that linked back to our strategy and how systems are well led and how they could add value to improve inequalities in a particular area. And there was also a call to make sure that we use data and information well, working with other national organisations. In terms of the oversight of local authority assurance, the second issue that we brought to them, there was key issues there were raising around CQC needing to be able to share good practice. Focus on how services were performing, but also sharing good practice between systems and areas. There was also a sense of a need to report back on change, so not just going into organisations and local areas once, but to report back on change and improvement. Local leaders, providers and people who use services collectively to develop a joint view of oversight. And I think that was both true of ICSs and local authority assurance. And finally, on wider regulation, there was an interest in how CQC defines quality in a system in an area and how that might look different from the provider level assessment that we make. And it also raised some ongoing issues around whether systems should be rated and what it would mean to rate a system. The stakeholders generally welcomed a single approach to our processes to ensure safe care. And there was an important note for us that in our future model, focusing on mitigating risk, it's important we can look just at the provider risk and also the system risk in an area. And finally, an important message about the understanding of quality and risk is as much about continuing to hear the voice of people who use services and continuing to cross threshold alongside the use of data and intelligence information. A strong support for it, but just to sort of to reiterate that theme. So to sum up, there's a good strong support for our role in systems regulation more generally, and also our role maintaining our role in improvement of systems. And the message is about working well with providers and public groups to create that unified view of quality came across loud and clear. That was it for me, Peter.
Thanks, Chris. It's probably quite a good opportunity just to thank members of the group publicly, because they do provide a really useful input to our thinking, don't they? So we should thank them.
They do, and they are all very busy people that come from a variety of backgrounds across healthcare, primary care, people who use services, and they contribute their thinking to us on a regular basis. ESAG is one sort of visible sign of it, but there are many others as well. So you're absolutely right, Peter. They are invaluable in helping to shape our thinking around the strategy and also how we respond strategically to other issues that are out there. So yes, I'll definitely take that opportunity. Thank you, Peter.
Good. Are we happy to move on? Right, Chris, I think that takes us on to the Green Plan, and I know you're joined by Tim Ballard and Max Hood are very welcome, but Chris, you start.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, so this update provides board with an update on CQC Green Plan and the main actions set out over the next 5 years. The plan aims to direct CQC's activities on improving our environmental sustainability performance, both as an organisation in our own right and as a regulator. The main areas of focus covered are changing how we work, smarter work and including less travel and incentivising sustainable behaviours, having a smaller estate, recycling and using less paper, better use of technology, and ensuring we procure in a sustainable way. To support the wider health and social care system, the plan also commits to us using our role as a regulator to encourage and promote sustainability in providers. In order to do this, CQC needs to be leading by example, and this plan sets us out on that journey. It's probably worth noting that in quite a few areas, for example, travel, we're aiming to establish a new baseline given the highly unusual times we've just experienced. It's probably also worth saying the plan is being developed by Max Hood, who is on the call, and supported by Tim Ballard, who is our National Clinical Advisor in Primary Medical Services, and he's been working on the regulation side of the plan. We also have Mark Chambers, who is the board lead on sustainability. That is it for me in terms of intro, but board's welcome to comment and hopefully endorse the plan that is set out.
Tim, I think you first bent my ear on this probably 3 or 4 years ago. So sorry it's taken a long time, but we are now properly on the road, I think. Stephen, you wanted to come in.
Great, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Chris and colleagues for this very interesting report. A couple of questions, if I could. The nature of CQC's business, even post-lockdown, means that the staff inspectors need to do quite a lot of travel. So it's kind of clear in the plan that scope 3 is your implied and consequential travel emissions are going to be really, really challenging. Are you actually intending to get to 0, or is your current thinking you'll kind of set yourselves a reduction target, but actually 0 is beyond you because of the nature of the business? Second question is this, do you see this only in terms of carbon, or should we broaden out to the wider set of sustainable development goals? Because there's a lot that CQC does and a lot that you could say that actually contributes to a number of the SDG goals going way beyond carbon 0 policies. So just interested to understand how your thinking's moving in those areas. Thanks.
Do you want to take the targets first, Max?
Yes. I mean, I think it's a very good point, and I think we do probably need to broaden out beyond carbon. In terms of the target for a reduction in inspectors' travel, I think part of it is just changing the way we work. But you're absolutely right, inspectors will need to travel, and what we're also looking at is trying to encourage sort of greener means of transport, so electric vehicles, those sorts of things, through our expenses and other processes. Is 0? We haven't set it as a target, but that certainly should be an aspirational target, I think. But it's just how we sort of, like other organisations, trade off one impact with a sort of reduction or an activity in another area. But I think that's a good challenge, and I think something we need to think about.
Yeah, and just to add to that, in the PMS Directorate, with which I'm obviously more familiar, we've embarked on a whole series of equipping inspectors and GP specialist advisors with the ability to be able to carry out remote assessments. So I've been involved with 3 over the last 10 days or so, and it allows me not to move from my own home, but have access to clinical systems in the same way as if I'd driven 100 miles to do it. So I think that will be part of the pattern as we go forward. It won't be the only way that we do it, but it will be open to us to actually deploy. In relation to wider goals, in relation to our regulatory function, I agree completely. I think that carbon is a useful metric, but it only goes so far. I think that especially as with the new strategy, we move into the space of looking at how whole systems actually work across health and social care. I think we'll be in a really powerful place as an organisation that we cover both NHS and private, and we cover health and social care, and we can see the bigger picture structure. And actually, you know, my aspiration for this for this would be to encourage us to actually look at exactly that, about corporate responsibility of providers and thinking about how they can actually affect the social determinants of health and not limit their ambition to affect health inequalities when people arrive at their door, but how they can work within local communities and with partners such as local authorities and get involved with, you know, wider social determinants, for example, fuel poverty, and how that can be tackled, and it has multiple benefits across society.
Peter, would you mind if, I mean, just to follow up Tim's point? I think the point here is that I do believe as CQC, actually we have a really powerful contribution we can make to many of the core sustainable development goals, and so actually I think it's valuable and important that we kind of broaden this agenda, because it's an important and positive one for the organisation. And in the run up to sort of COP26 in November, there should be lots of opportunity to sort of work with others and set out the stall in terms of what we're doing. So I think there's a big opportunity here.
Peter, could I just add one more thing to that, or do you want me to take the next question? I'll take the next question.
Go on, Tim. Go on.
It's just to say that I think in the early phase of how we respond as a regulator to this, you'll be aware that the Climate Change Committee published a report only in the last 10 days or so, where they described the UK wider society as shockingly unprepared in relation to adaptation to climate change. And I think that fits in very easily with our current accepted methodology about business continuity and safe environments for people. But again, I think there's an opportunity for us to take that wider and think about how we work with systems to keep people safe in their own homes during heat waves, so that it's not just about the fabric of hospitals and care homes.
Great, Tim, thanks. Ted.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Just a big thank you to Tim, Max and colleagues for all the work they put into this. I think it really is important. And this is just where kind of area where CQC as a regulator needs to show leadership. And I think, you know, getting our own house in order is clearly an important part of that, but also making sure that we see sustainability as a key element of a well-run organisation. The NHS is a major emitter of carbon, and it set itself a net zero goal by 2040. And I think as we go forward and look at well-led NHS trusts, and this presumably apply to other providers as well, we need them to be able to demonstrate to us how they're contributing to that and how they're going to achieve that. So and it isn't just important in its own right. It is, as I say, an element to show this is a well-run organisation that is thinking about, you know, long-term measures, but also, as you said, Tim, the effects of sustainability on improving the health of the communities they serve, and very much fits with our health inequalities theme in our strategy. So I think it's really a very important initiative, and I do think we need to build it strongly into our well-led framework.
Yeah, thanks very much. I couldn't agree more. And I think, just for the record, we need to quite a substantial amount of work internally to work out exactly how we will develop what I've been calling a sophisticated and sensitive approach to this agenda for providers and for systems. But I think our early thoughts are that we see it sitting very much in well-led, and that a reductionist checkbox approach to this area of activity would be very unhelpful, and it's very much about encouraging. And I think it fits with our accelerating improvement agenda as well, in how we get systems and providers to celebrate excellence in this area and learn from each other.
I totally agree, Tim.
And Max, you're leading by example by cycling miles, I know.
I am, yes. Thank you.
Any other comments? I mean, this is really important, but a really good report to get us on the way. Sally.
Thank you, Peter. Just to say, I'm really supportive of the report. I just wondered whether there was some differentiated work we need to do in our different directorates, because if you read an NHS Trust annual report, for example, There are whole sections on sustainability. But if you look at primary care, for example, where the organisations are much, much smaller, and adult social care as well, there won't be an infrastructure in place to help those organisations, will there, deliver their bit of sustainability. So I don't have an answer for now. I think it's just a thought about whether we, Max and Tim and the team, do a bit of differentiated work, because in trusts there are already people on the ground working on this, and others might be more towards the beginning of their journey.
Yeah, thanks. So just so the board are aware, we've done some collaborative work with the Greener Practice programme, where the lead for that is one of the ex-presidents of the RCGP, Terry Kemple, and we're working with them in the PMS Directorate to try and understand what the opportunities are there, and to actually develop our approach across all of our directorates. We've got a workshop that's planned for very early in July for SLT 30, where we're hoping to actually start to unpack some of these ideas and try and address what it means for each directorate and the areas that they relate to.
Great. Good. So, board, we're asked to both note the report, but sorry, I can't speak. Endorse the action that's already underway. Are we happy to endorse the action? Yep. Good. So Max and Tim and colleagues, thank you very much again for all you're doing, and no doubt you will be back at the board periodically to.
I sincerely hope so, Peter. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks a lot. Good. So Chris Day now, Insight.
Great, thank you, Peter. So for this Insight report, the penultimate report in its current form, there's an opportunity to look ahead to the full Learning Disabilities report, which will be out next month. We wanted to share some of the early thinking, focusing on support for people with learning disabilities, alongside our regular update on data. So as colleagues will know from the early conversation, for a long time, people and their families have faced significant and ongoing challenges in getting the care that they need at the right time to meet the individual's needs. And we've seen how this can lead to people staying for long periods in inappropriate care. We've also know that there is good care and good practice out there. Provider collaborative reviews have aimed to show the best of innovation across the system, alongside some of the areas that we know need to change. What we've the latest review has sought to find out a bit more about for people with learning disabilities who live in a community and what impact the COVID pandemic has had on them and their services they receive. And to do that, we looked at whether people with learning disabilities can still access the care at the right time that they need. It includes how organisations collaborate to keep people safe. We also look at the impact of the pandemic on people living independently in the community, and also how providers balance the needs of staff to keep them safe, and continue to provide the right support for people, and finally how digital technology is supporting and preventing services from being able enabling people to provide the right care at the right time. So what do we know so far? I think that it's fair to say that the pandemic has shone a light on the pre-existing challenges and the gaps and the poor quality in poor quality care. There have been and continue to be some clear signals that there should be no one-size-fits-all care for people with a learning disability, because by nature the services should be tailored to the individual. We also know that some of the approaches to care delivery that can provide enabling and support can really make a difference to the way care is provided. So giving people a choice and control to be independent. This includes supporting them to live independently, but also being cared for close to family and friends. Access to the right care and support at the right time, including access to the right healthcare, and also how to deal with emergencies and crises. And crucially, collaboration between services with a person and their families. So the appropriate sharing of information between different agencies, their likes, their dislikes, their interests, their preferences, can help build a service that helps keep people living well in the community. We have previously voiced concerns about how services don't always do these things, don't always join up to deliver the right care for people. And the full report will look at some of the real areas of concern that we have around some of the models that still exist. It's also clear that the pandemic has introduced some new challenges. For example, how during lockdown and social distancing has affected the ability of people to access services, including GPs, dentists, daycare and respite care, and how people have continued to be supported and what the impact has been on their health and well-being during this time. We know there's been a sudden shift in technology. We just talked about it in terms of the previous paper, but that shift in technology can itself have a negative impact on some people with a learning disability. So we're looking more at that. This report isn't just about what others need to do and change. It's also about what we as an organisation need to do. And from our perspective, registering services in the right way to make sure that they are services that will deliver support for people, supporting providers to improve, and influencing the improvements in the care pathway, ensuring that commissioners take the right action. These are all things that we've talked about, and we're all things that we're doing as a part of this. And so the full report will be out in the July board, but we wanted to give this opportunity to cite some of the good practice and also some of the developing themes before the main report is out. Rosie, then if you wanted to say anything more about that.
Just to say thank you to the teams that have been involved in this piece of work. It has been a fantastic piece of work, and what we've tried to do is really look from the person using services viewpoint, and you'll see in the report as it comes out, we've based all the themes on what we've actually we've been following people's stories through different parts of the system, and that will shine through in the report and the experiences that they've had, and that leads on to the themes as presented here. So looking forward to bringing back that report in July to you.
Excellent. And just to say that alongside that report, there'll also be a further update on our cancer PCR, and also an update on the information around deaths in adult social care. So all that will come through to the July board. Happy to take any questions or comments, Peter.
Thank you, Chris, and Rosie as well. Questions or comments, colleagues? Gosh. So, Chris, I think it's another really good and very insightful, if you'll pardon the pun, very insightful report. So grateful to you, but I know a lot of work goes in behind the scenes to actually pull these reports together. So thanks to a rather wider group as well, I think.
It's a very good cross-team. I think you might be on the call, but there's a cross-team effort that goes into making these things possible. So it's a really, it's a good example of collaboration across the organisation.
Thank you. Rosie.
Just to add more generally about the provider collaboration review work, because there's been a huge amount of learning that's come out of these provider collaboration reviews, and we're now working with the team to say, actually, how do we get these messages out so that they can have the maximum impact? I would encourage anyone working in systems to read these reports, and we will be putting out, I'm keen to explore how we get some of that learning further into systems so that we can really enable the learning from this to deliver change that's so desperately required in many of the systems.
That's a really good point, Rosie. We've already been talking to NHS providers, NHSE, and the groups that support local authorities around how we can position the messages well. We're going to have further conversations with other colleagues as part of that ESAG group that I spoke of earlier, so we can make sure that messages don't just come out today at a particular time, but they're ongoing conversations about how they're integrated into the support. One of the things that the ESAG group talked about was how useful the conversations were around these reports to help stimulate debate locally, and hopefully that we'll do this exactly the same with the next two PCRs on learning disabilities and cancer.
Thanks, Sally.
Thank you, Peter, and to Chris and your team for the reports. I find these really helpful read to try and give us a sense of what's actually going on in settings where people receive care. And I suppose I just wanted to say we've had a bit of a debate, haven't we, about our role in tackling inequalities as CQC, and the fact that we can't really do it on our own. But I think this is a really good example of highlighting, particularly for people who are vulnerable or where there are inequalities, the data that we have that can be used by the wider system to complement both the work that we're doing, that we heard about before from Debbie and Mary, on supporting people with a learning disability or who are autistic. But whilst we can't tackle inequalities, I think it's a really good pointer for other people to use. So thank you.
I think that's right. I think tackling understanding the variation is good, and why do some areas, some systems, some organisations manage it, I think is a really important. It's really important for us to be curious about that, to understand it. So I think we can guide others' actions in tackling those as really important inequalities.
Good. So I'm going to suggest, because we're running slightly ahead of time, that give Imelda a chance to get here. Sally, if you're happy.
She's here.
Oh, she's here.
Yeah.
Oh, right. OK, in that case, we will stick to the order of the agenda. Imelda, you're very welcome. You didn't pop up on my screen, so I didn't know you were here, but you're extremely welcome, and Robert's extremely relieved you're here. So.
Well, I had prepared a very long speech to make sure that we gave her time to tell introduction, if I may, not wishing, of course, to steal Imelda's thunder, but you have our report, and I'd just like to highlight 4 things very briefly. One is to pay tribute to Imelda and her team for the amazing work they've done about the impact of COVID in various ways during the last year in collecting people's experiences, and not only just doing that, but actually transforming that into responsive action in relevant quarters. And I think that shows the real value of Healthwatch. Secondly, to draw attention to what we are planning or hoping to plan in relation to our presence, which we think is needed at ICS level in the future world under the health bill. We've been continuing to have very constructive conversations with the department and NHS England about that. And I think in general it's accepted that Healthwatch is at least if not the principal vehicle through which ICSs should receive and communicate to people who use services about their needs and be responsive to them. Of course, it's not the only channel, but it is clearly a very valuable one. But obviously, to do that, we need resources to do it, and that is a matter that's still understandably under discussion. Which brings me to the third point, which is about the level of support available to local Healthwatch. And as you'll see, we continue to have concerns about this, and we don't actually see this improving very much in the near future. But in a world in which not only our strategy, but it would seem the NHS strategy is to be listening to those whom the service serves in relation to their needs and being responsive to that, we do think that to make that real, there has to be proper support given to local Healthwatch, and we will be keeping our eye on that. Finally, I draw attention to a work that I think, if I may say so, CQC generally can benefit from, which is our report that recently produced on the attitude towards vaccines amongst certain minority communities, well, not so much their attitude, but also the way in which communications about that are received. And I think there are lessons to be learned on a rather wider field in relation to how we gather and respond to people's experiences, and not make assumptions that just because an announcement is made, whether by us or government or a health service, that it will be received in the way that it's intended, and that actually people like making decisions for themselves, and they like getting the information upon which the recommendations are made. I mean, in particular, they like getting that information and advice from people they know and trust. And the nearer to them those people are, the more likely they are to trust them, and trust is really what makes healthcare generally work. So I would commend that report, because I think it's not only fits in very well with our new strategy in relation to listening to people, but I also think it's a very valuable tool in relation to furthering the inequalities agenda that we quite rightly focus on. So that's all I want to say, and I will obviously leave Imelda to tell you more in her own words about the detail.
Just before we bring Imelda in, Rosie, you wanted to come in.
Sorry, I can wait for Imelda. I just wanted to say thank you to the Healthwatch team, because I think the collaborative work on a whole range of areas with DNA, CPR, with GP access, with dentistry and PMS has been absolutely brilliant over the last few months. So I just wanted to say thank you to Robert, Imelda and the team for all their joint work with us.
So there you go, Imelda. We haven't spoken a word yet, but you've got thanks, so that's
Thank you, Rosie, and I'll pass that back to the team. I would say it's quite a mutual appreciation society. I think things are going very well, and it's a very respectful and productive relationship that we have. So thank you, and the teams too. The first thing I should say is apologies for the length of the report. This was written for our committee last week, and I'm afraid I just didn't have time to squash out the stuff that you don't need to hear from us, but I'm sure you could skim over it or ignore it. There are a few things that I wanted to pull out, and I will go back to the piece that Robert talked about, which was the research that we did on vaccination hesitancy, and it was amongst particularly African, Bengali, Caribbean and Pakistani people, very concentrated, purposefully just picking those groups because they were the groups that were further away from vaccination. But the learning from it, as Robert says, is much greater than just for the vaccination programme, and was really very useful just this morning when we were having conversations with NHSX about their new data strategy and getting public buy-in and getting the public to understand it. And one of the first learning things from it is that people do not want us to skate over ambiguity. They don't want us to pretend it's okay. And I think there's been too much of that. You know, we know, trust us, just get behind us because we're politicians, or, you know, and the public are just saying, no, we don't want that. We want the ambiguity to be raised so that we make our own decisions. We want to see the evidence that you make your decisions on. So we want the link to the papers that you're saying that that you have made your decisions on, and even if we don't read them, we want to know that we could access them if we want to. So what the public are asking for is much greater depth of exposure to ideas and information. The other thing I just want to highlight quickly is the Because We All Care campaign, which we've run together with you, and I think that has been really interesting piece of work. I think, as I understand it, about 54,000 people have shared their information with us. A great source of data. We've been using it to help with our regular insights that we do to, you know, what's happening with people during COVID. So we were able to do a sort of real highlight on what's happening with carers and so on, and that data will continue to be really useful. So thank you for that. And I see Chris has got his hand up. So
it was only to say, as another thank you, really. It was only to say that I think the success of that campaign was more so because of the partnership that we had to deliver it, and I think that's just one of the examples of how we've collaborated this year, which has been a very important at a time when the pandemic has thrown many of the things off. I think the ability to reach out to people who use services collectively has had a real impact in our ability. And if you look at the responsive inspections we've done on the back of that information, I think it's a testament to the way the organisations have worked together. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the flow. I was just going to come in later and say that.
No, I would agree. It's been incredibly useful insight that during a pandemic, when we're not out meeting people like we would do in other circumstances, it's been fantastic. Just briefly, also on hospital discharge, you'll remember a couple of months ago we did an in-depth piece of work with people who had been on the receiving end of the rapid hospital discharge, the discharge to assess process, and we did it both from the perspective of people who were out of hospital quickly, the perspective of their families or their carers, and the perspective of the workers, the staff who were making those decisions, either social workers or people working in the community. And that gave us quite lots of information that we were able to feed into NHS England and help them with their discharge policies. We continue to work on them because what we've identified is there are still a large
group of people who are falling through the net, who are identified as not needing any support when they leave hospital, but actually they're pretty frail, and that quick, rapid turnaround of a few hours is not always helping them. So that work continues to see about how we put a safety net in, which is not very costly to do, but just is a follow-up so that people feel that they are better supported as they leave hospital. Partnerships remain very important to us, and I think over the last few years we've really grown that partnership approach, and it really pays dividends. And at the moment we're working in very close partnership with Carers UK, the Red Cross, Age UK, the NHS Confederation, the LGA, and so on. And I think that really gives depth and reach to our work. As Robert said, we're really looking for how we respond to the establishment of ICSs on a statutory footing, and how we understand very clearly what health watch role should be. What we're looking for now is how do we get the resources to make sure that we have that infrastructure to provide that insight at an ICS level and at a very local level. At the moment we're very strong at a local level and at a national level, but it leaves that gap where I think we can do a really good job on that. We've done quite a lot of work on NHS 111 first. So rather than people going to A&E, that using 111 and trying to make appointments and trying to make sure they're diverted to the right place, and we'll continue to monitor that, and because I think it isn't in the public's mind yet. There's a lot of work to be done before people understand that there is a better approach to accessing A&E now. Our work on dentistry, which we shared with you all along, I think, has really resonated with the public and has had a huge amount of coverage in the press. And we're now talking properly to the parts of NHS England and the Department of Health that are responsible for dentistry problems. We also published a report which was on access to GPs and to primary care services through GP surgeries, and that was based on the experience of over 200,000 people. And you all know and have rehearsed the difficulties that there are for our current primary care services to respond to the demand that's out there. And we hope that the piece of work that we've done will help add to the knowledge so that we get change that's needed, both for primary care and for the public trying to access it. We've really worked hard over the last quarter on our parliamentary engagement as well, and have had some success there, and far more than we would have done in the past. And I suppose finally, I just want to, because it's a sort of a newer thing for us, we're also working hard on building our academic partners. And so far we've been doing some work with the LSE, with Sheffield University, Northumberland and King's College. So we're beginning to build that. I think it's a crucial part of our strategy that we are also anchored into good and relevant academic institutions. So I think I'll leave it there, and I'm more than happy to take questions or comments.
So just a comment from me, Imelda, and just to say, this is just fantastic. And one of the problems that we have, not just in healthcare, but in society generally, is you have lots of anecdotal information, which is usually based on one or two people's prejudices. And what you're doing in Health Watch is actually getting really quite a substantial number of those anecdotes. So 200,000 was one you mentioned in relation to access to primary care. So that goes beyond just the odd person, and I
Yes.
think it's really weighty evidence and really valuable. So just to say thank you for that, and to encourage more. Mark Saxton.
Thanks, Chairman. And Imelda, just to echo the Chairman's thanks to you, because don't apologise for the length of this report. It's a fantastic read, so thanks for supplying it.
Yeah.
What I really love about your report is you really focus on needs. So, great work around GP access, great work around dentistry, NHS 111 first, and your inequalities study, and your vaccine study. And what I really like about the report is your profile building. So you are getting to influencers and decision makers, and so they can hear what's happening on the front line. And your brand development work is great. But can I just ask one question, please, around dealing with the backlog of care? I wondered if you're going to do some specific research on this, on people's experiences of treatment delays and the running down of the waiting lists that exist post this pandemic.
Yes, Mark, we are beginning to hear more than we were during the height of the pandemic. We weren't hearing much from people who were having delays and have been now for several months. We're working with NHS England on feeding that insight in. So rather than doing it, sometimes it's better just to do the insight and hand it over and work with people, rather than do a more public-facing piece of work, because you don't particularly want to stir up lots of anger and anxiety amongst the public. So we're feeding that insight in regularly into the work, which is about the return to elective care and the return to other care. And I'll have a look and see whether there's more we should do on that, actually, because we've been doing it gradually for a few months now. So I'll go back and have a look at that, actually.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thanks, Sally.
Thanks, Imelda, and to Robert. I love all my CQC board papers, obviously, but this was one of the highlights for me this month. I just really love reading about all the excellent work you've done, so thank you. Just had 2 or 3 separate things that I wanted to ask, if that's okay. One, I'm quite interested in the fact that you've been able to make better use of both traditional media and social media. And I just wondered how that fitted with, hard to reach groups or vulnerable groups, and whether there's any tension in getting people's opinions. I guess that's the first thing. Secondly, you have talked about threats to your funding or potentially difficult tenders on the horizon. And I just wondered whether you could comment on that. And linked to that, Robert might have something to say anyway, but you've been really complimentary about the partnership with CQC, which is really nice to hear. But I wonder whether there's anything else that we could help you with.
Thank you. The media one is quite interesting, because I think we've had a low media profile for too long, and this year we've invested more in having the right staff in place, and I think we're also much better at focusing on impact and outcomes than we were. And so if you get that right, and for us it means getting 151 organisations also doing the same drumbeat and sending things in a way that makes it into an interesting thing. So we have a story to tell much more than we used to, I think. And that story then is newsworthy. So that's part of it. And our social media profile, I think, is based around that, because we've got interesting things to ask people and tell people. So that's going up. The other thing we did was massively increase the information to the public over recent years, and that's really paying dividends. We weren't particularly an information provider. We've moved into being. It is within our statutory remit to provide information, but it had been interpreted in the early days as a signposting role, and actually we provide information now to the public a lot, and that brings people to you. You're not just asking them for something, you're giving them something, and that then develops relationships. We are thinking long and hard about how we target that media, that work on people whose voices are not heard. And so we are working really hard at the moment on designing a campaign that will happen in Q4 that will be about really targeting people whose voices do not come through. It's hard, and you get lower numbers. So what we're looking at is trying to get that balance of the big numbers on the big generic stuff, and smaller numbers on stuff where we want deeper insight. So the vaccination report was only around 90 people, but it was in depth. We spent more time doing that work. So we're in the beginning of that journey, I'd say, of really targeting our messaging and our media work to people who are further away from being heard. And it's going to be a journey this year, I think, because I don't think it's good enough yet. And to do that, there's masses of change management that has to happen behind the scenes. We have to do a whole new digital approach to it. We have to have a whole new taxonomy. We have to get 151 organisations buying into all of that. So there's a big drive that goes behind trying to do that right. It's hard and complex, but it is our plan to do it. Yes. And threats to funding, yes, it's a continuous worry. I mean, it's our biggest risk, without a doubt. Our funding for the Health Watch at a local level comes through local government. Local government, as we all know, is squeezed beyond belief. You know, the ADAS talking about how difficult it is. I think there's only 4% in their recent survey, 4% of local authorities thought that they'd be able to meet their statutory duties. And when local authorities are under that level of pressure, they look to see where they can squeeze it. So even where they have really high performing Health Watch and they really value them, cuts are still coming. So we're doing all that we can to mitigate that, in terms of we've got a big programme of work with commissioners. We've got a quality framework to commission, so that we really understand what high quality Health Watch is. We're also talking to the Department of Health. We've just written our annual letter to the Secretary of State saying, you know, you have this statutory responsibility to deliver this. This is what's happening on, you know, in your patch. Yes, it might be happening through the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government, but nevertheless, the statutory responsibilities remain with the Department of Health and Social Care. So we're asking for a meeting about that, and we're also asking for more work to be done across government to sort it. It's really complex because the funding isn't ring fenced into local government, and government policy is not to ring fence, and it hasn't, you know, that has been government policy for a very long time. I mean, 20 years or more. So it causes us real problems.
Yeah, could I just echo that? In a certain report, what is now over 10 years ago, nearly, I expressed this concern, and I think we will have this concern as long as financing of local Health Watch goes through this circuitous and not hugely transparent route, and it's something the National Audit Office has commented on, but that we have to deal with life as it is. On the Sally's partnership point, we've come a long way over a few years in improving the working partnership between CQC and Health Watch, and clearly there is always more we can do. But I think we now have a much better way of working as a small and independent, mostly semi-independent organisation within a bigger one, because the needs are quite different, and there have been times in the past where there's been frustration about procurement, for instance, which is designed for a huge complex organisation being applied to a tiny one which wants to make quick decisions. But I'm very happy to pay tribute to Chris Usher about this. A lot of these obstacles are being removed, and it is much easier for us to operate. I think there is much more in terms of potential that we can do, and I think we've been beginning to demonstrate this, both and Chris Day's efforts as well, in firstly the use of Health Watch information by CQC, and I think we're seeing much more of that. And also I think the other way, actually, the ability of CQC to reach out to Health Watch a bit, and maybe there's an exchange of information and work that we could have more of. And I mean, there are all sorts of things one could talk about, but I think we now are, because the conversations we have, we are much more likely to be working in the same direction. Our strategies are pretty well aligned, and obviously we both share a focus in relation to health inequalities, albeit approaching them perhaps from a slightly different angle. But I think actually we're on continuing on the right path with regard to that. And equally, we don't want to get so close we are the same, because actually we are doing different things. And Health Watch, the value of Health Watch is that it's unique in being statutorily funded, but also independent, and long may that last.
Any other comments from or questions from anybody? So just again, Imelda and Robert, personally, I think it's a great report. I think you've heard from a large number of board members that have echoed that. So I think our collective thanks to you both and Imelda, to your team and the wider health watchers around the country. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. And Blessing has her hand up. I don't know whether it's for me, Blessing, or for something completely different.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I didn't. I was so busy looking at you on my screen. I didn't see Blessing. I do apologise.
Hi. Yeah, it is for you, Imelda. I just wanted to ask about your campaign design going forward. If you had plans within that to kind of put the spotlight on inequalities as a result of socioeconomic factors and also digital poverty, because with reference to some of the progress we've seen on vaccination in minority communities, I think we may have some answers in this area as well with regards to some of the pushback that we're having among the social care workforce, who I think make up quite a bit of this area.
You raise a really good point, Blessing. We've just launched last week a piece of work on the move to the digitalisation of health and social care, and we've been working with an organisation. I think it's going to be an ongoing piece of work. So we did a shorter piece of work which was called The Doctor Will Zoom You Now, which is about people's experience of using digital. Then we've moved on to do a bigger piece of work around how digital can work and in what circumstances. But I think the next piece of work is really very much about who's in and who's out. And so we've been working with I don't know whether you've come across the Good Things remit. Is primarily around people from poorer communities accessing the digital world, because it is it's quite privileged. People have access to the internet in their house, to laptops, to smartphones, and I think it isn't. So often in health, people will talk about digital work is not very good for, I don't know, people who have autism or learning disabilities or elderly, but actually that socioeconomic exclusion is massive as well, and I think we've got to really work hard to make sure that those people are not left behind. So I think you raised an excellent point. We'll continue that work on it, and we'll talk to you about it as we do.
Good. Now, I really don't think anybody else has got their hand up. So once again, Imelda and Robert, thank you very much indeed. And we will move on, Sally, to the ACGC report. Minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. I won't go through the minutes in detail. I'll assume that people have read them, but they are draft minutes from our report, from our meeting that happened a couple of weeks ago, and they'll be approved in October at our next one, which is why they're still draft. So just a couple of highlights, really, and then I'm happy to take any comments. The internal audit programme for 2020-21 is complete. So credit to both our auditors, but also our exec and our internal management team for delivering that through a pandemic. Is the first thing. There is one report around closed cultures still to. We do operate our subcommittee of ACGC, which has hopefully provided useful support to our transformation programme, and that continues. We work with RGC, the other committee, on supporting the exec in managing our key risks. And I think it's important to say, because this isn't always apparent in every organisation, that our risk register is live and it's used and updated. So again, credit to everyone who's involved in being able to work on that. We are in our annual report and accounts cycle, and we've had a couple of really good meetings. One which we had with our non-execs and audit committee members together, where we provided the feedback that we had from different points of view into the draft of the annual report and accounts, and I think everybody thought that was a useful meeting. There are some final amendments to be made from our meeting a couple of weeks ago, but we agreed to recommend that the annual report and accounts come to the July board, which is where you will see it. There is one issue potentially around the annual report and accounts, which is the same one as last year. There is a delay in the auditing of local government pension schemes, which will impact our timeline. And we are in the same boat as many other people. So just to note that really, and we'll discuss it more in July. Just going forward, we have an internal audit plan for 2021-22, which we also broadly agreed in terms of work packages. What we want to focus on are things that we consider to be high risk, naturally, but also a slight change in emphasis to support the delivery of our new strategy, which has been so well received. So with a few tweaks to that plan, that work has started. And I just wanted to say thanks to all of our staff, the people behind the scenes as well, in Kirsty's directorate and who work in Chris's team, for all the work they've done on the annual report and accounts so far, the work that's still to be done, but also the fact that they're very happy to look forward and shape the new internal audit plan. Thanks, happy to take comments.
Sally, you know there's nobody more excited or enthusiastic than me when it comes to annual report and accounts, but I think the reality is that because these have to be laid in Parliament, it won't be July that the public board sees the accounts. Isn't that right, Ian? It'll be only when they're in a position to be laid in Parliament.
That is my understanding, yes.
So just want everybody in the public who might be getting as excited as I am about seeing the accounts, just to warn them that that's a pleasure that may be delayed, but we'll see what happens. Any
Sorry,
questions?
you clarified probably in the private board session, but that they won't become public yet.
That's right. Yep. Unfortunately. Okay. Any other comments from anybody? Right. Thank you, Sally, for that. I am struggling to see, is Henrietta with us? You hear Henrietta or not yet? So we are miraculously.
I don't think she is, but I've just called her into the meeting, so we'll see if she responds.
Right, if not, we might just award ourselves a 5-minute stretch break. Because there's no other business that I can bring forward unless anybody's got 10 minutes of other business, which they haven't notified me of, so I don't think they have. So let's just pause the meeting, have a short stretch break. And let's start again at 12:35. With a bit of luck.
Matthew has just gone offline.
Okay, I will wait.
This problem this morning.
All right. Excellent. So after that short stretch break, we're back, and I'm really pleased to welcome Henrietta Hughes, our National Guardian. And Henrietta, you've got a report to deliver, so let me hand over to you.
Well, thank you so much. And I want to say how grateful I am that you've invited me to come to the board on it could be really more appropriate. over the last quarter, there's been quite a lot of activity in my team, and I just wanted to draw your attention to a few things in the update that I've sent in. The first one is our website. Having started with a few web pages on the CQC website and then had our own independent website, we've relaunched the website now, and it has more user-friendly functions, in particular one called Find My Guardian. And this means that you can put your the details of your employer or the details of whereabouts you work, and it comes up with the list of guardians that are relevant for you. And I think this is a really positive step forward compared to previously. We had a very long PDF, which was quite unwieldy. And we've also got other search functions and just makes it much more user friendly. The next thing I wanted to mention is the Freedom to Speak Up Index. We published the report recently, and once again it shows an improvement nationally. So there's been a 3.7% increase in the Freedom to Speak Up Index over the last 4 years, but we're seeing a widening gap between the organisations with the highest and the lowest scores, and disappointingly some organisations actually seem to be going backwards rather than in the right direction, and that's something that we follow up with other partner organisations in terms of how we can offer support. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the introduction of Freedom to Speak Up in primary care settings. And this was a piece of work that we were commissioned to do by NHS England Improvement, a 2-year project, to look at how Freedom to Speak Up could be integrated into primary care. Now, primary care is so complex with tens of thousands of organisations across GP, dentistry, optometry and pharmacy. And members of my team, through hundreds of conversations, have come to the conclusion that it's possible to engage with primary care in 2 different ways. The organisations are either large enough to have a head office type of function and operate a bit like an NHS trust in that way when it comes to appointing to a Freedom to Speak Up guardian, or for the smaller organisations, if they either come together in networks or they have an external Freedom to Speak Up function through, for example, the local medical committee or local dental committee. And in this way, it's actually taken that really kind of complex landscape and simplified it so that it should make it easier for primary care organisations to understand how they're able to implement the Freedom to Speak Up guardian arrangements. So I just really wanted to just highlight that, because I think it's a really interesting and important piece of work. And then finally, there are some other areas that I've been involved with, including the Ministerial Oversight Group for the recommendation from the DNA CPR report, Your Report, Protect, Connect and Respect. And I've also been invited to take part in the Maternity Safety Culture Working Group and Steering Group, following on from the Ockenden report. We'll be soon publishing our strategy, which sets out the aims for the next 5 years related to the needs of workers, Freedom to Speak Up guardians, leadership and the system as a whole. But I also wanted to say that this is my last board meeting for presenting to CQC, as I'm going to be leaving to chair a children's charity, the Institute of Systemic Therapy Childhood First, from September. So I wanted to just say thank you so much to you, particularly Chair, but also all the board members for all your incredible support and encouragement. And I feel very confident that handing the baton on to the next National Guardian, that you'll continue to provide all of the support and actions needed so that speaking up does become business as usual.
So you beat me to it, Henrietta. You will not be surprised. No, I was going to thank you, but it is quite incredible when you think that when you started, there really wasn't anything, was there? I mean, this was a new office that you have built up, and it's now, you know, a fundamental part of the system. And I think huge credit to you and all you've achieved in the role. And I don't think we can thank you enough for what you've done. I wish you huge success in the future. I'm sure, I very much hope anyway, our paths will continue to cross, and you know, on a personal level. But huge thanks again, Robert. You were really responsible for all of this, I think. So
you don't blame me for everything, Peter. No, this is, if I may say so, an area I'm really so grateful to Henrietta for turning what was a vision on a piece of paper into a reality across the service in very difficult circumstances. This was not easy to land because this was not a way forward that met with universal approval, if I can put that gently. And yet Henrietta, through her advocacy, through her passion and her commitment, has turned that into something that is present throughout the NHS in a way which, as Peter says, I don't think could be reversed. But that's not to say there's a need for complacency because or justification for it, because this is an area where if you're not pushing forwards, someone will be pushing backwards. And but I think Henrietta has laid more than a foundation; she's laid a real structure. And I think now whoever takes over will have a fantastic opportunity to take forward something to the next level. So I'd like to thank her personally. I'd like to think of her as a real friend too, and she's certainly a person to turn to in a time of need, both as a general practitioner but also as a national guardian. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there any questions for Henrietta on the report? I mean, it just following on from what Robert was saying, Henrietta, I mean, it does seem to me that whilst this is firmly established, if we aren't careful to keep the pressure on, it can wither on the vine, and that's the last thing we want to see happen. So it is important, isn't it, for the office to keep the pressure on everybody, including us.
Well, I think you're right. There's no room for complacency because it's a mindset shift, and that requires information, data and stories to remind people why this is so important. And the other thing that I was going to say is that making out like I've done this by myself is impossible. You can't do anything by yourself. You can only work in partnership. And I think the work of my office, the team, the Freedom to Speak Up Guardians, over 700 guardians now, and they've dealt with 50,000 cases. So just in thinking about the scale of it, that's 50,000 people, 50,000 cases that have had productive solutions. So I do think it does require that onward momentum. But there's a lot of allies around the system who are really keen and see the benefits of this in their organisations. So I do think that it's a collective effort.
Yeah, but led by you. Right. No other questions or comments for Henrietta?
Stephen's got his hand up, please.
Oh, right. Not on my screen, but Stephen, please. And now Mark as well. Stephen.
Thanks, Peter. Henrietta, could I just add my thanks? I mean, amazing work that you and your colleagues have done. It's really brilliant. And what it creates is a fantastically important and rich picture about the cultures going on in different organisations. So my question, which may be as much for Mark Sutton as it is for yourself, how well are we actually using what you're telling us? Do you feel that kind of the feed of your information into CQC's understanding of different providers is there? It's fully integrated, it's close, it's all working, it's robust, or is there still an agenda to follow up to make sure we're using to best effect all of this very, very powerful information that you and your colleagues are creating?
Well, I think there are two areas that I wanted to focus on. One was in terms of the data-driven approach of CQC, that the Freedom to Speak Up information is now part of that. So the analytics department include the information there. And the second thing is about the inspectors. And I had the absolute pleasure and privilege of training hospital inspectors. And my experience was that the more that the inspectors understand and recognise the impact of a positive or negative speaking up culture, the more enthusiastic they are about incorporating it into their well-led inspection. So I think that there is something about the sort of the theory and then the practice. The final thing I would say, and this is a conversation that I've had over the years, is about whether you can be an outstanding, well-led organisation if you don't have a positive speak-up culture. Now, there's no one way of measuring that. There are multiple ways of measuring that. But I think what we can see is that organisations who've really their ratings have reduced over a short interval, it's not unusual that that's related to problems in terms of the way that the leadership have responded to the speaking up from their workforce. So I'm not saying that you are required to have this as a rate limiter, but there is something about that. And I know Ted's got his hand up because this is a conversation that we've had many times over the last few years.
Go on, Ted.
Oh, well, you've caught me on rating limiters, Henrietta. But before I get onto that, can I just say that the work you've done over the last 5 years has made a real difference. You're talking about that training of our inspectors. It's had a big impact on them and their ability to assess well-led, and it has a really major impact on our well-led assessments. And I think it will be central as we go forward and develop well-led. We're talking about focusing on the leadership culture of organisations much more, and the freedom to speak up culture is absolutely central to that. And certainly in my visits to hospitals, you can feel a real difference on the front line in terms of people's willingness to speak up if you compare it to where we were a few years ago. So I think it's had a big impact both on the culture, but of course then on the quality of care that patients are receiving. To come back to rating limiters, because you asked me about that, it's very difficult because if you have rating limiters, then you end up boxing yourself in and you'll never have any outstanding organisations, because no organisation is perfect. What we're looking for in organisations is not perfection, but it is a desire to continuously improve. Freedom to speak up, measures of freedom to speak up, cultures are going to be really important. But I'm very worried about having rating limiters. Before you joined us, we were talking about sustainability and the importance of that, and that's really vitally important. We could make that a rating limiter. We could end up with a whole series of rating limiters that would effectively stop us ever awarding outstanding to any trust. And I'm very wary about doing that. So it is really important. You have my total assurance on that, but I prefer not to put it in as a kind of technical rating limiter.
And I'm totally with you on that one, Ted. Sorry, Henrietta, but for exactly the reasons that you say. Mark Chambers.
Thank you. And I mean, Henrietta, I'm in awe of what has been achieved. I spent, wearing one of my other hats, spent quite a bit of time trying to help businesses build ethical cultures, and it's hard, even with the clearest possible leadership from the top in simple organizations. So how you've built support, how you've mobilized resource is astonishing, and I think you have built something which is a really solid foundation for very good cultural things to be happening. I think a speak up culture where people feel free to call things out which don't feel right is a really vital part of a healthy culture. It may not be a rating limiter, but it ought to be a red flag if it's not there. And organizations should want to do this. I mean, this really tells you what's going on in an organization, and it's an incredibly useful early warning of things going wrong if leadership have really bought into this. I think these disparities are deeply worrying. Cultures don't sort of exist in a vacuum, and microcultures are an area that we really worry about. They correlate. They're going to correlate in our world for increased risk of harm. So where we do have an indication that people are not comfortable speaking up, that issues are not being raised, I think that's a vital warning for us as part of our assessment of risk across the system. But I think what's been achieved is amazing, and I think it's a lasting foundation for good. So thank you.
So if we were meeting as we had originally planned in person, Henrietta, we would now entertain you to our usual lavish board lunch. As it is, you'll probably have a much better lunch wherever you are, but without our company. And just once again, on behalf of everybody, thank you for everything you've done for us and for health and social care generally, and wish you every success in the future.
Thanks so much.
And that just leaves us with any other business, if anybody has any other business for the board. None's been notified, so we'll assume there is no other business. So that is the end of the formal meeting. But I do have two questions, both from Robin Pike. The first is hospitals gather intelligence about outpatient experiences via text surveys, and GP surgeries do the same via friends and family tests. How is this intelligence shared with the CQC? I think it's a bit wider than that, but Mark, I think you might be able to answer that.
I will indeed, and also touch on, I think, a little bit about the previous conversation, as the point that Stephen raised there about sharing of National Guardian Office information with us. So I think it's a very important question, and it's an important point because the information that is about people's experience is really important for our regulatory work. That friends and family test data is made publicly available, and our intelligence teams regularly use that data to provide a range of indicators to our regulatory colleagues. For example, showing the percentage of patients that are recommending a trust for a range of specialties, including outpatients. It's worth noting that during the pandemic, friends and family tests in both GPs and hospitals were suspended and not available to us, but it's now resumed for hospitals. So we're able to get access to that important information again. And in general practice, they are actually developing a new method for real-time patient feedback, and we're awaiting more details on those developments and how we can get access to that rich information. And it's also worth noticing that that isn't the only source of information that we have on people's experiences. There's a rich range of information. We use NHS and GP patient surveys, comments left on NHS and review, information from Local Health Watch, and as we touched on in the previous conversation, the National Guardian's Office, feedback from individuals via our contact centre, and our relatively new Give Feedback on Care digital service, via which people can provide feedback on health and care services, and our partnerships with organisations like the Patients Association. And finally, as an important part of our transformation work, we'll focus on improving how we access, analyse and use people's experience throughout our regulatory model to achieve the ambitions that we set out within our new strategy.
Thanks, Mark. And then the second question, I think, Rosie, this will be one for you. When will the arrangements for inspecting dental services be reviewed? Dental surgeries are currently not rated. Rosie.
Yes, thank you, Peter. So in line with the CQC strategy launch, we have started to review the way regulated. We worked with many of the dental stakeholders during the development of the strategy, and are continuing to work with dental stakeholders through a regular dental reference group that we hold. We've introduced smarter regulation with the dental sector, and the work we've been doing introducing the monitoring approach with the TMA and other monitoring approaches have been very much welcomed by the sector, and we've been encouraged to build on that work by the sector. So we are starting to look at the data sets required to really drive an intelligent-led assessment in our dental providers, and we will be continuing to review how we monitor and what a streamlined, smarter inspection would look like.
Thank you, Rosie. And there are no other questions from members of the public, so that is it for this month. Thank you very much indeed. And I suggest that we've caught up a bit of the time. So if we start, we were due to start again at 2 o'clock. If we started at 1:50, that gives us a pretty decent lunch break, and we should be able to knock off the ACGC and RGC reports, which I think are the only two things that are outstanding. Is that okay?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, the RGC report was given to the last public board meeting, so there's not much to report there.
Okay, and Sally's given most of the private report and the public one. So anyway, let's start again at 10:02, and we'll just formally knock those items off for the minutes, and then we'll be in good shape. So is that okay? 10:02.
Right.
Thank you.
Cheers.